Welcome! On behalf of the Center for Serve, Learn, Sustain and our co-sponsor, the Ignite First Year Summer Launch Program, I want to welcome you all to a panel discussion called Centering Racial Equity in Equitable and Sustainable Development. My name is Rebecca Watts-Hull, and along with my colleague Ruthie Yao, our role is Service Learning and Partnership Specialist for SLS. We connect Georgia Tech students, faculty, and courses with community partners, like the three wonderful organizations that you'll learn about this evening, around key sustainability challenges. This event is part of SLS and Ignite's Sustainable Communities track. I want to thank the Ignite program and especially Christina Wan for supporting this event. I'd also like to thank the 4 faculty members who've been partnering closely with SLS on this summer's Equitable and Sustainable Development program: Alan Hyde, McKenna Rose, Nick Sturm, and George Thomas, along with all our instructors and students. SLS realizes how challenging teaching and learning has been this past summer, and we want you to know how much we appreciate your commitment. We also have many terrific community organizations represented in tonight's audience, including several that partner closely with SLS. Thank you as well for all that you are doing in highly challenging circumstances to advance equity and sustainability. As I'm sure all of you are aware, in a moment where great attention to systemic racism and racial injustice offers the promise of systems transformation. As a result, we decided to focus this event specifically on racial equity and to invite local leaders working in that space to share their wisdom. We're very pleased to have the privilege of hearing this evening from 3 women whose work can help us better understand why advancing racial equity is central to advancing equitable and sustainable development. I'll begin by providing a brief introduction to our panelists and the organizations they represent. Then I'll moderate a discussion among the 3, leaving time for questions afterwards. Throughout our discussion, please share any questions you may have through the chat function as they occur to you. We'll get to as many of your questions as possible this evening. First, I'd like to introduce Nicole Moore, who's Director of Education for the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Nicole is a public history and museum professional with a focus on American history from slavery to civil rights. Located just a half-mile south of Georgia Tech's campus, the center is a cultural resource connecting the American civil rights movement to contemporary global human rights movements. The center also leads outreach and engagement activities, including a webinar series on health and human rights. Currently, the center's Campaign for Equal Dignity sponsors virtual events and provides anti-racism resources and training. We also have with us this evening Odetta McLeish-White, Managing Director of the Transformation Alliance. Odetta is a community development professional with extensive experience in affordable housing, community stabilization, and transit-oriented development initiatives. The Transformation Alliance is a partnership of nonprofits, government agencies, and businesses, all working to ensure that opportunities and benefits associated with transit investment are shared equitably. TFA centers racial equity as it engages initiatives to improve housing, employment, health, and transportation options throughout Metro Atlanta. And finally, we're also very excited that Carol Hunter is with us. Carol serves as Executive Director of Truly Living Well Center for Natural Urban Agriculture. Carol's a broadcast and nonprofit professional committed to positioning Truly Living Well as a leader in the urban agriculture space. Truly Living Well grows better communities by connecting people with land and with good food. The center manages multiple farm sites in Metro Atlanta that produce certified naturally grown fruits, veggies, herbs, flowers, and other value-added products. The organization's on-site training programs create a welcoming space where community members can learn to grow healthy food together. So thank you all very much for being with us tonight. We really appreciate your willingness to share your expertise. I'd like to begin by having each of you provide a brief description of your organization, its mission, and its connections to racial equity and sustainable development. Carol, would you like to start us off?
Thank you. Thank you. Hope everyone's having a great evening, and thank you for joining us. Truly Living Well was founded in 2006 by Rashid Nouri. Rashid had traveled around the world working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and some other major food companies. He was able to see from the inside the brokenness and inequity in our food system. He believed that in order to have a viable community, you must be able to feed, to clothe, and to shelter your people. And he believed that urban agriculture is a solution. That brought him to Atlanta and the founding of this organization. Truly Living Well is dedicated to using natural and organic farming in urban areas as a transformational tool. As an education center, we grow natural and organic food, we connect people to the food, and we work to build sustainable food communities. We also demonstrate a replicable model in which urban agriculture as a center creates a hyperlocal food system that can transform the health, the wellness, the economy, and the safety of a community. We're currently based in Atlanta's West Side at Collegetown Farm. Since our founding, we've been located in 4 different communities in the area, Metro Atlanta area that did not have food access. This location is our 4th location, and I'm so happy to share this is one that we will finally own. I actually signed the papers this past Friday, so still a little giddy about this new development for our organization. This is really significant because there was a time in our history where former slaves and their descendants held about 14 million acres of land. But by the turn of the 21st century, 90% of that land was lost. So it's really important to us that we're able to lead by example as we encourage people for self-sufficiency, for self-empowerment, to be able to grow their own food on their own land. Before COVID, we had about 44,000 people that would visit our site and engage in our programming, whether it was through agritourism, volunteerism, our farmers market, our education programs and classes. And this was really significant because all of that community got a chance to experience what we're doing here at Truly Living Well, but also to learn a little bit about the history of growing food in this country and what it means to people of color.
Fantastic, thank you. That's a great overview. Odetta, would you like to share next?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. And like huge snaps, Carol, that's amazing news about buying your site. That's so great. That's so great. The Transformation Alliance is a 35-member collaborative working here in Metro Atlanta to strengthen communities through transit. We're actually founded, this is sort of the 3rd iteration of a run at an Equitable TOD collaborative here in Atlanta. And I guess third time's the charm. But really what instigated this coming together was when MARTA announced its TOD programming. And they announced the opening of that programming just as we were all starting to watch how the Beltline, without transit being added yet, just the trail development itself, was sort of in real time shifting markets, displacing long-term community, African-American communities throughout Atlanta. And it was clear to community development advocates, housing advocates, planners, all sorts of folks that a TOD program for MARTA, which was looking to reutilize underdeveloped parking around all of the MARTA stations, that was going to have a potentially similar impact to the Beltline because we have seen the deep impact of development near transit. It is highly desirable to be near a transit amenity, typically a heavy rail station or even near a bus stop, can really, within the quarter mile or half mile of that transit amenity, impact land values, cost of living, rent for both residential and commercial buildings. It is a market changer. It is catalytic. And even if you do happen to own a piece of property or own your home, perhaps the land value goes up and therefore the taxes will go up. And suddenly people find themselves priced out of their generational homes, and they're being priced out by something that is subsidized by their dollar. So they are in effect paying for their own eviction and removal. So as we got together and started discussing these things, we were very lucky at the time that Amanda Ryan was the head of the TOD program at MARTA. She was very open with us about what she needed to be more successful, and we created some early programs like the En route community engagement program, which used deep community engagement to create 4 very beautiful murals at 4 stations around the MARTA service line, but we were also able to share that information with Amanda so that she could write RFPs for developers that were more responsive to community vision and its sense of self and place. The next big thing that happened for TFA, and I promise I will land this quickly, was when we received the Strong Spokesperson Resilient Communities Challenge, or SPARK, with 2 C's grant, which asked us to explore the intersections of race, climate, and health in the built environment. And they asked us to focus on a system that we felt was going to be really shifting the market in our city. And of course, we felt the transit system was that. So since starting and since really centering race and racial equity and the effects of racism on why those communities were so easily moved once the market decided it was time for them to move, we were able to really grow our members. People in this day and age are hungry for values-aligned memberships. And so as we really sort of were explicit about race, we found that our membership went from 15 members to 35. And we kind of hold 2 North Stars, the first being racial equity, and that your race should not determine your opportunity in life. And the other is that transit is critical to so many mission statements and so many goals that we strengthen communities through transit.
Terrific. That's a lot of really exciting initiatives underway. Thank you. Nicole, would you share a little bit about the center?
Sure. The center just celebrated its 6th birthday. As many know, we are located right in Pemberton Place. We're in between the World of Coke and the Aquarium. And we were the vision of the late Evelyn Lowry, of Ambassador Young, and of the late Juanita Abernathy. They wanted a place in Atlanta where they could talk about the civil rights movement. So it's known as the cradle of the movement, birthplace of Dr. King. Consortium, the largest consortium of HBCUs anywhere. And this is where a lot of the action happened. But they realized we can't just talk about the civil rights movement in Atlanta without looking at the city as a global city and understanding then that you need to really kind of talk about the human rights as well. So we have the Center for Civil and Human Rights, and we have 3 main exhibit areas when we are open. We look at Rolls Down Like Water, which is the American civil rights movement starting from mid-1950s through the assassination of Dr. King. We have Spark of Conviction, which is our global human rights gallery, and that's looking at human rights very briefly, starting with the aftermath of World War II, but really concentrated on what's happening today globally. So we're looking at trafficking, we're looking at women and girls' rights, we're looking at labor, everything that is happening. And then on our first floor, we have Voice of the Voiceless, the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. collection. And that's where you're going to see the artifacts that belong to Dr. King. And the mission of our center is we want people to reflect, inspire, and then transform. When you come into the space, you're reflecting on what has happened in the past. You are seeing the strides in which we've made, but you're also understanding that there is so much more work that has to be done. We hope people gather inspiration from seeing leaders like, pains me to say this, but now the late John Lewis and Dr. King. That took me someplace. And C.T. Vivian, these men and these women of the movement like Dorothy Height and Diane Nash, who is still with us, that really pushed forward this vision of civil rights and what it means to be equal in this country, to really kind of live out that creed that all men, women, children are created equal. And we see that legacy that's there. And we want people to draw inspiration from those figures to understand what they've gone through, but to also carry on that fight. And when people tend to look at the civil rights movement before current events, it'd be a lot of people who are like, oh, well, we're past that. But then they would draw inspiration from human rights because they're like, what can we do that's affecting this area, this area, this area? And now I find ourselves coming back to that national picture of civil rights and the protection of our rights. And so when we do reopen our doors, we hope that people will come back into the building with kind of a fresh sense of purpose to not just look at the story of the American Civil Rights Movement as the 1950s and 60s, but as today. The movement never ended, it just evolved, it just transformed. And so when we're looking at it, it's no longer just about Black or white, it's no longer just about interracial change, it's about gender identity, it's about orientation, it's about who you are, and understanding that those rights are for everybody, and the fight for them is so important. So we really just kind of ground people in that. And then the last thing we want them to do is we want them to leave transformed. We want them to be advocates in their communities. We want them to feel like they are empowered to create change. They don't have to be on the front lines. They don't have to be the person that's all in the news, but they can find a way to create change within their communities. They can do petitions. They can make signs. It's however you see yourself in a movement. That's what you need to do. Because not everybody can be on the front lines. You've got to have somebody in the background. You've got to have people organizing and strategizing. And so we really look at kind of when we're looking at equity and really sustainment, it's those pieces. It's finding where you fit and how you create that change. Because for a lot of people, it could be working to close food deserts. People don't think about things like that. But if they realize, oh, wait, folks don't have like fresh vegetables to eat, how can I then make sure that right to health and that right to have those things is a part of their everyday life? So we kind of set the stage for people to learn, to really dig deep, so that when they leave the building, they are the Carols, and they are the Odettas, and they are the ones transforming their communities.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that overview of the great work that each of your organizations is doing. What I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about now is a little more about the how of how you do that engagement work. So all three of you are engaged in education and to some extent advocacy that is trying to contribute to creating a more just and sustainable world. But we all know it can be really hard to help people decide to engage and find ways to get involved, with so many issues and concerns competing for their time and attention. So can you talk a little bit about who you see as your primary audiences? And based on your experiences engaging people who are in those groups in challenging issues like racial justice, what do you find helps inspire and empower people to take action? And Odetta, would you like to start this time?
Sure. So this is an interesting question for me always, because as kind of a collaborative or intermediary sort of space, the Transformation Alliance has several audiences, in my opinion, and I'll venture that Carol and Nicole will say something similar. But really, for me, my first audience, frankly, is my membership. The Transformation Alliance as a membership collective or collaborative, it really seeks to help these 35 folks find resources, find one another, and grow as leaders in their space. We have organizations in food access and mobility justice, organizing, racial equity, affordable housing. It's a really diverse group of people. Hence the need for those clear North Stars of racial equity and transit, strengthening communities through transit. But also they all need to be strong leaders in these discussions in their own spaces. And so Transformation Alliance is an area and a space where we talk about race very openly, where we can discuss the need for not just transit access, but mobility. That was an important evolution of our thinking when we started bringing in members who deal with mobility, because it's fine to have a great MARTA station with soccer in the streets and fresh market and lots of, activity and things going on. But if the sidewalk leading up to that train station is broken and pitted and poorly lit, that's not justice, right? That is not access. So we need to be thinking about the infrastructure around the transit as much as we are the actual transit. And we need everybody to understand how you may or may not be taught that what you do touches race and equity, but trust me, it does. The transit station that we are trying to improve and build upon probably cut through a Black community and through some Black business district under the urban renewal program in modern America, right? Why are certain neighborhoods placed where water and stormwater flows down towards them, right? Those are racially produced concentrations of people, redlining and zoning laws and planning. Those were all the mechanisms and the systems by which racial bias were expressed, and it ended up putting some people in less healthy places to keep others in healthier places. Each one of us will have some example that we could talk about. We also want to talk a lot about language in Transformation Alliance and rooting out sort of thoughtless language. And only because I see Carol in front of me, I will think of the issue of food, right? So we tend to talk about food deserts. But what I've learned in my work with TFA is, a desert is a naturally occurring phenomenon in the world and in the natural ecosystem. The lack of groceries, the lack of fresh food, the presence of too many liquor stores and other kinds of, things like that, that's a man-made situation. So the work that I read that taught me was to say food apartheid. Right, so we have to really think about the systems and the fact that somebody at some point made a choice to make things look the way they do today. So if we are going to fix it, we have to be equally intentional and fix our language and really come at this together. So so they're right there, 35 groups trying to go through that learning journey is such an important role, I think, for Transformation Alliance. And then through my members, as they grow and reach out, we distribute dollars to them. We have issue champions who are stipended to work with us each year. We do a community grant program where we can do some re-granting to groups like Truly Living Well and to other nonprofits that are in our partnering geography, where we do try to touch community after working through our members, who often are frontline organizers and work with community, is by having identified a partnering geography. And for us, it's the neighborhoods around 3 MARTA stations, West End, Oakland City, and Fort McPherson. If you were to draw an oval along Lee Street that included those 3 MARTA stations, that's the place in the area of Atlanta that we try to prioritize our work. So I find myself often first starting with my membership, and I sort of look a little bit to direct community. I'm up here in East Cobb. I can't say that I speak for any of the neighborhoods that we work in, right? They have to speak for their own experience. And what we want to do is clear the noise and help them get the platform they need to talk about their issues. And especially in the summer of 2020, we can see what happens when you do not give people platforms to not only share their issues, but to solve them. It will pop out somewhere. And we see that with the protests. And the fact that people are protesting in the street in the midst of a pandemic lets you know that they think there's something even more dangerous than a virus threatening them.
Thank you, Odetta. Carol, would you like to add on to that?
Sure. It's a part of our work. We all know that food is a necessity, and that everyone should have the right to fresh, healthy food. But we know that access to healthy food, as Odetta pointed out, is largely dependent upon location, affordability, and also cultural appropriateness. Ethnic foods, regional food, grandma's favorite food, all of these things, food becomes a part of our identity. So when you don't have access to this food, it really becomes very personal. What we found when we first started doing this work back in 2007, actually even up through the last 10 to 15 years, is that a lot of people in the African American community didn't want to go back into farming because they had not healed from just everything that we had been through in slavery. So one part of our work was really helping our community understand how important it was to begin to grow their own food and the benefits of controlling where your food comes from. Um, a second part of our work was really to help people to help us to have a seat at the table as we began talking about this food justice and social justice issues, how it impacted food. And so the way we were able to do that was just through earning the right, doing the work on the ground in these communities, which allowed us to get that seat at the table. And what's so important about being there now was now we got to be able to speak up about access in our communities, the needs of people who don't have the financial means to grow their own food. And we were able to hopefully, and still are able to redirect some of the resources into our community to address some of these issues. And we're still trying to be a part of those discussions so that we can have a voice, be a trusted voice, and advocate on behalf of others. And then just basically the teaching that we do is just so significant and we teach everyone. Anyone can come and participate in our classes. We've created an environment that is safe where people can come share in the growing of food, but also discussion about the land. You learn a whole lot about a person when you're working alongside of them. So we create that safe space in our community for that to happen.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like you both, Carol and Odetta, focus a lot of your education work on helping folks understand some of the roots of inequality and systemic racism. Nicole, would you say the same thing, or how would you describe the primary strategies of how the center goes about doing its work?
I would say that where Carol and Odetta are the focus, we provide an overview and we kind of get people to think about the injustice. And so we start them off looking at Jim Crow America, which has a lot of it rooted in sharecropping. So when Carol's talking about how the Black community is like, I want to farm, because it brings back not just enslavement, but it's also looking at the system of sharecropping where you are free, but you're constantly in debt. You're constantly shackled, and people have grown to say, I don't want that life. I don't want to be like that. It's a look to it. So getting people to kind of understand what systems were in place, and how Jim Crow and how segregation and really how white supremacy created this world that we really live in of oppression. And when people realize that, we don't necessarily want you to be bogged down in how bad it was, because you need to understand that. But we also need you to understand that there was a fight and there was pushback. And there were men and women who said, we are not doing this anymore. And so when people understand the system and they understand systemic racism and they understand how that's built through laws and how that's upheld through leadership and how that is enforced with legislation, then they start to see, in order to break that, you have to strategize. You have to figure out, what is the issue? What is the root? Now you have to figure out, all right, how do we dismantle that? And is it a protest? Is it a boycott? Is it a sit-in? Is it hopping on a bus because the interstates are integrated, but these rest stops are not? It's taking, each little piece, each little layer and snapping it. Because if you try to attack it as a whole, it becomes too much. It becomes overwhelming. But what they're seeing through the Civil Rights Gallery is how individuals and small groups combated the systems. They combated oppression. And I get using the system. I kind of hate it because it seems like this broad, like for some people, it's almost like mythical, the system. And it's like, no, this is a legitimate system of laws. It is a system of policies. It is a system of everything that we operate within. and you had men and women, college students going in and saying, all right, this part of it, this little slice right here, we can handle this. We want to be able to eat at a lunch counter. We want to be able to sit down and do this. How do we break this up? Our dollars are good, but our presence is not. So how do we make you understand that our presence is just as good as our dollar? And if you don't want if you don't want our presence, then you're not going to get our money. And we're going to prevent you from getting everybody else's money. It is taking those pieces and really getting people to understand that you don't have to go far to create the change. You're starting where you're at. So if you're saying we need fresh produce, then let's pop up a farmer's market in our neighborhood. Let's teach people how to grow something as small as a container garden, and then that expands to plots of land. Let's teach people how to break through these barriers here and there. And we give examples. We give them, when we're looking at the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted in 2013, we saw that the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote. They never lost that right. The 19th Amendment gave Black women that right to vote. They never lost the right. The constitutional right, but they were terrorized out of exercising it. And so it's teaching people to understand that you have this constitutionally. Now let's go to the local level, let's go to the state level, and then let's make this a national issue where our Constitution says this, you will give us this. We don't need to know how to read everything. We don't need to pay a tax to do this. We don't have to do that because constitutionally we don't have to. And it's really getting people kind of look at the issue, attacking it, and then moving to the next thing. Then it becomes fair housing, and it becomes affordable housing. It becomes those things where it's like every time you close a door, we're just going to go ahead and, crack it. We're going to look underneath. We're going to look through the sides, and then we're just going to take the screwdriver and we're going to take the door off the hinges. It's helping people understand that you create change by getting a focus, knocking it down, and then you go to the next one and the next one and the next one. And it's kind of getting people to understand King's ideology around the beloved community. We're all in the same struggle. We all have a struggle. We need to help each other get through those struggles. And so when we're looking now at kind of the racial justice movement that we are really seeing, particularly Black and brown bodies in law enforcement, you are seeing people saying, this virus that we know is taking out people left and right, it's not enough to stop us from creating this change. Because in order for us to survive this virus, we have to survive these instances. And in order for us to survive the virus, we need to be able to get seen in a hospital that will take us, even if we are Black, even if we are brown. We need to be able to knock out these systems. We need to be able to feel safe enough to call for help instead of separating and deciding, do I call 911 or do I just let it ride? Because I don't know which one is going to be worse. And it's getting people to understand that you can get an issue, you can latch onto an issue, you can educate yourself about the issues, and then you find an organization that's working on what you're doing. So they would go to a Carol, they would go to an Odetta, and they say, listen, this is what I'm passionate about. How can I help? How can you help me? And then they're learning about food and they're learning about transit. And you're diving into that. I kind of see us as this place where people learn it, get fired up, and then when they leave us, they're like, all right, who needs me? Where do I need to go? And once they do that, then they're seeing themselves being activated. They are seeing themselves being advocates of change. And then they're actually putting that passion and that feeling into motion. It's no longer just, oh, what do I do? Or this was so terrible. It's, all right, how do I act on this? And how do I create that change? And without kind of learning about it and getting incised about it, then you just seem like, oh, that was then. But a lot of people are saying that was then and it's now. How do I stop the cycle? How do we make sure that this movement is the last movement? And when those folks leave our doors or when they log off from our programming, because everything's digital now, we hope that they're taking the resources that we've given them and they're finding some way, some organization, some group to latch on to and say, let me help you. I want to create this change.
Wow.
I got I'm sorry.
Thank you, Nicole. You're on fire. So that was wonderful. You've all been sort of moving toward, I think, what are incredibly helpful suggestions for our students about what they can do, how they can learn more, how they can get involved. So you all pointed to how joining an organization and learning through an organization. Of course, a lot of these issues we're discussing in courses at Georgia Tech as well. And SLS is trying to point students toward courses that do exactly that. I'm wondering if you also talked a bit about the protest and about what willingness to protest in a pandemic demonstrates about the depth and significance of these challenges. Are there other things that, for a college student specifically, you would recommend in order to take the next step, to learn a little more, in addition to perhaps trying to find an organization that really aligns with an individual's particular passion? Maybe, I think you spoke to that a little bit, Nicole. Odetta or Carol, would you like to jump in on that question? What you would advise a student?
Carol, may I? And then
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Being in academia, you are going to have so much access to information. And so I will take for granted that Georgia Tech students know how to research things, get on Twitter and follow some people, really expand the network of how you're receiving information. And your own families, right? Explore your own stories. You might discover things you didn't know, immigrant stories, immigration stories. There are movements within the country of people moving from different areas that help you access why all of this discussion of structural racism, systems change is so important. I think part of the information that would be great is to understand systems. You're hearing all three of us talk about this, but there's a lot of study and research on what is a system, what are the levers inside of a system that you could try to push or shift so that you can make change. And if you marry the understanding of a system with a belief in racial equity and understanding that the system looks a certain way today for a lot of reasons, not just because somebody, again, thought it was logical to put all the Black people where the stormwater goes so they can get asthma when it gets moldy, right? That's not logical. That's race. That's racism. That's a personal belief showing up in policy, right? So if you as a young person can marry those two understandings, you will be so far ahead in your profession. And you can push your profession towards better thinking and better problem solving. I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, is problem solving. The only other thing I'll say before I step back so Carol can speak is especially in a place like Georgia Tech that looks at technology, science, engineering, mathematics, I want to ask folks to be careful about the hunt for innovation. Right? I want you to think very carefully as young people about that word and what it really means and how it is really achieved. And the example that I give when I speak about this is coming from a housing background, a lot of discussion about tiny homes, right? And everyone's very excited about tiny homes, and they can be a wonderful technique and strategy for certain things. But the idea of living in a tiny home is not innovative. Poor people have lived in tiny homes for thousands of years, right? What's an innovation is the entire subject or issue of race. Race is an innovation as a concept. Somebody came up with it, right? People developed this new way of looking at one another through the lens of race as a construct. It's a created thing to enable them as humans to mistreat other people, right? To do racist things, you have to shut off a part of your own humanity, right? And so you need some reason to make it justifiable. And race was created to do that. So that you could say somebody's smarter and somebody's less intelligent. Somebody was created to work. Others were created to think and guide those workers. that's a construct. So think very carefully about things like innovation and discovery and all of that, and really get back into the wisdom of your elders and your people. You will find many of the concepts you think are new already there. And what you can then do is use technology and platforms and your education to open up pathways for that wisdom to show up again, right? And that will be a tremendous contribution to the world. That's what I want to say on that. Carol, thank you.
Thank you, Odetta.
Yeah, just, ditto to everything that Odetta said. The only thing I will add is that as you come into community work, listen first. So many times people come in meaning well with great ideas, but they don't give the folks who have been there credit, and they don't listen to what their needs, their wants, and their desires are. One of the things, as Odetta mentioned, we've had poor people living in tiny houses forever. They also have been surviving forever and have created ways of survival. And so we have to respect that culture, we have to respect that part of the struggle, and we have to listen and learn from them, because there is wisdom there in how they've been able to survive. Now with technology, with new ideas, how do you build on the foundation that's already there in that community? And so come in first to listen and to learn and to ask questions, and then be willing to respond and to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that very much. That reminder, Carol, I think takes us to one of our questions. So I want to start taking some of the questions that have been coming in from participants. And someone asked about community priorities. So how, in working to advance equitable and sustainable development, as a Georgia Tech student or anyone who's trying to advance these goals, how do you know, if you're an outsider to a community, what those community priorities might be? And you spoke a little bit to that about listening. Are there other things that you would recommend in terms of how to try to partner with a community and really understand their priorities as an outsider?
Can I start that? Because I think right here we have, even in this panel, a great kind of pathway. Places like National Center for Civil and Human Rights, which I love, is a great place to explore trends in history, right? And so you can ground yourself. It's always good to have background, but it will never replace what Carol is calling for, which is, and I find this hard to call people to do because I'm kind of an introvert. Nobody believes that, but I actually kind of am. And so it's very difficult to tell people to just go to that community, just go meet people and listen and ask questions. That can be very weird for you and for the other groups, right? And for the community, right? Who are like, who are you? So I think you have to seek out places of trust where if you're there together, that is a signal that there's something you share in common and you're willing to learn. So that might be getting involved in a church, that might be getting involved in a ministry of some kind. It could be just going to a community garden and doing simple things alongside. I think that's the power of what Truly Living Well offers. The act of growing food alongside someone will generate conversation, right? Or if there's something you love, like reading or other things, like just find ways to do those things in, frankly, a non-pressure situation. Like you're there just to create community, and you will discover the conversations coming from there. So many people also want to share what's happening, especially the elders. So maybe you can do a small, careful program that is about story gathering or storytelling. Maybe bring a recording set up somewhere and ask some elders to just talk about their lives and their families. Their stories will have embedded in them so many lessons and examples of race and overcoming that you will just learn from listening to them speak. But you got to find a way where you can come as your own authentic self, because people can tell when you're there to study them, and when you're being an anthropologist about it. And you be an anthropologist in the library, right? Be an anthropologist in the museum. When you get out to meet people, you want to be who you are, and be very authentic. And then people will sense that, and they'll know, even if these may or may not become your best friends, but people can sense when you're not being authentic, and they will not share with you in the way you might.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd just like to add,
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a young lady earlier today who wanted to come in, and she kept saying, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And so I asked her to come and volunteer, just come and volunteer. She's going to come in and volunteer 2 days. I said, after you volunteer, let's have that discussion. So this may sound simple, but also as you approach this, give it time. We need time to get to know you and you to get to know that community. And in that space, the question asking and answering will come so naturally. And then you're able to find or be able to help determine where I can help. And if I fit in, if this is the place for me to fit in, it may be someone else, somewhere else that is a better fit for you. So give it time, listen, but do act. Don't sit back and wait. Do act.
Thank you. Nicole, do you want to add anything?
I would just echo what these ladies have said. When you come in and you're asking questions and you look like, oh, what am I doing? You might look like the feds to some people, and they're not going to want to talk to you. You want to back it up a little bit and really just kind of learn the environment. You want to show that you have a true interest, but being too eager kind of puts people on like, what you doing? What do you want? What's the catch? And it's just really kind of being that natural progression, like get to know people. Like, I love the idea of just working, because I love gardening, working in the community garden and talking to people. Like, okay, well, how did you make that zucchini grow? And because all of mine have died. Like, just getting to know people and sharing, because they're going to see your authentic heart, and they're going to know that you were there for true purposes instead of a feel-good moment or just to check off a box. And go into spaces where you are truly passionate about what you want to do. Don't just go someplace just because you're like, oh, well, this seems right. Don't do it because it seems right. Do it because it feels right, and it feels natural for you to be there. Because that's how you're going to have the greatest change, but that's also how the greatest trust is built.
Terrific. Thank you. And we've gotten some questions about opportunities at Georgia Tech that are directly related to exactly what you're talking about. So we want to make sure that you all know, and we'll follow up with all the participants via email, how to get connected with Serve, Learn, Sustain. Many Serve, Learn, Sustain affiliated courses will help you do exactly what Odetta and Carol and Nicole are referring to. Will provide orientation to how to engage, about how to engage with communities in an appropriate and respectful way, where you're listening, you're learning, and you're using exactly some of those strategies that they're talking about. And I know that registration time is coming up. So one of the things we've been highlighting on the Serve, Learn, Sustain website and through our blogs are courses that include these kinds of community partnerships, and also courses that really dig into the helping you understand the roots of systemic racism and exactly the kinds of issues we've been talking about this evening. So I also two things you can do: find Serve, Learn, Sustain affiliated classes, and find classes that will help you understand these issues better. We also do student advising, which will very likely be virtual, once a month, and are happy to connect with students at any time. So definitely please be in touch with us about how to take advantage of those opportunities, SLS. Let's see, let's move to another question now. Let's see, there's one here. I know and imagine that a lot of white folk want to see change, want it to be different, and want to get involved, but because we've never talked about race, we don't know how to do it, or we don't know how to talk about race. Great question. How can we start having conversations so that we can learn? And Odetta, you talked a bit about how TFA does that quite a bit, talking about race within the context of all the work that you do. Do you want to try and, not to put you on the spot, but would you like to tackle that tough but very, very important question?
You're muted.
I think you're muted, Odetta.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I was like typing and then tried to hit the unmute. But I was saying that I think Nicole and Carol will have thoughts as well. So here's the delicate balance, right? I want white folk to learn, and it cannot be done at the expense of the health and mental well-being of Black and brown people, right? There's this. And this is a challenge, right? I want to acknowledge it, because you will come looking for information and not realize that you are maybe the 10th person to ask that Black friend of yours for this kind of knowledge, right? And it's important to understand that when any marginalized person tries to share what they're going through with you, it is deeply painful, right? So you are asking them to reenact a lot of pain and physically go through a lot to enable your efforts at empathy and understanding. So there's a balance between talking to your friends and having those robust conversations that are necessary, and doing your own work so that you can come to those conversations with certain things kind of handled. The name that I put into the answer I just gave is a local consultant named Jen Wilsea, Wilsea. And I think she's made a great offering of white affinity groups, right? White people, let us gather together and talk about white supremacy, how it works, how privilege is showing up in your life, even if you think it is not, and to do that work together in a way that allows you to show up for the multicultural conversations with more information, and more ability, more skill, right, in having the conversation. The other thing I want to say is another delicate balance is it's important to understand the history and to acknowledge privilege where it acts in your life. I understand the privileges that I carry as a light-skinned Black woman in America, as a child of immigrants in America, as a heterosexual Christian woman in America. These are privileges that accrue to me, given the system that we're in, right? So you have to understand your own privileges, and you have to be able to kind of, explore them in ways that don't, you just have to be prepared to do that work all the time, right? And it's going to feel very weird. And that is why doing it in spaces of trust, or in sort of low pressure spaces like check out the museum together, go grow something together, creates the safe space for a brave conversation. And then you can start to translate that out into other things. But it's definitely kind of a skill set that you're going to develop, and it's going to take your whole life. You will not be done with this. And the better you are at entering the conversation, you'll build up like a muscle. I tell people I look fluffy on the outside, but like my emotional muscle, I am like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? Because marginalized people have learned how to sustain. There's another word we could talk about. What does sustainability really mean, right? We have learned how to sustain in this conversation so that from generation to generation to generation, we can accept increments of change and keep pushing for harder stuff, right? And protect our young people, and make sure our elders are safe, and make sure, there's a lot to do. So we have built up a tremendous emotional capacity, and sometimes callous, but that is what happens when you have to challenge things generation after generation. So take your time. It is okay to find white affinity groups, to find a place for you to do the learning you need to do. And then you can bring a better sense of how to have those conversations into maybe a multicultural or a more mixed experience kind of space.
Thank you. You want to hop on that, Carol?
Well, yes. What I want to share, what we found in this time, especially in our community, a lot of people have been under a lot of stress for a long time. And this movement, this time that we're in now, for some people has just like lifting the cap off the pressure. Have you ever had one of those pressure cookers and it just needs to let out a little? And so this is the first time in some of their lives that they've ever been able to let out some of that steam that comes from the deep hurt that they've experienced living in America. What we've been doing at the garden is trying to create a safe space where people can de-stress. Being in nature will do that. As we talk about food and putting your hands with food, we can talk about food and talk about our history without it being confrontational. So for us, what we're contributing at this time is just a safe space for people to come together in just a few minutes, an hour or two, and work. And so recognize as you are embarking on this awareness that there is a lot of pain and it's going to take time to heal from that pain. So make sure you are prepared to be a part of the healing process. And so as Odetta said, make sure you're in that safe space first so that when you go into these environments, you can be a part of the healing and the solution.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I would just add, ask. Like sometimes we will want to talk about it because we don't want you to know. Sometimes it's like it's too much right now. Ask, is it okay? Is this a good time? Or do you have a couple of minutes too? Because I'm one of the few people that I know right now, a few Black women that I know that are like, yo, let's talk about it. Let's go. Because it's exhausting and people are tired. But sometimes I recognize that there are questions that need answers. And sometimes you just got to say, I have a question. Is this okay to ask right now? Is it ever okay? Or just don't just jump into the space. Just kind of layer it like, yo, is this okay? And be okay with hearing no. And I saw in the comments, like, it's uncomfortable. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you feel real good about these conversations and you're just like, oh, yes, something ain't right. You need to feel kind of this, it needs to feel a little bit dirty because that means you're getting to the root. That means that you're starting to question. That means that you were really digging deep. But if it's just like, oh, yeah, I heard this and I feel fine and everything is going to be magically wonderful, you need to take a step back and really look at it and really look at yourself. Privilege doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's how you use it. It's how you help others with your privilege. And if that means taking the load off of somebody who is being burdened, use your privilege to do that. Help in those ways.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic way to end. So thank you for that. I want to thank all three of you for sharing your incredible wisdom and your experiences and taking the time to provide such a rich discussion for our students and our partners with Serve, Learn, Sustain. Thank you very, very, very much. And thank you everyone who joined us this evening. We did record, so if you came in late or for folks, if you know folks who weren't able to hop on, please let them know that the recording is going to be available for them to benefit from. And we wish you well. Definitely check out related community engagement opportunities and courses with Serve, Learn, Sustain. And we can't wait to see you at the next event. And Odetta, Carol, and Nicole, we can't wait to see you with our next opportunity to connect y'all with our wonderful students. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the
Thanks for having
opportunity
us.
Yes, thank you.
to hear from Carol and Nicole.
And
Bye now.
For managing the back end. Thank you so much.
Everybody have a great night.
All right.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.